Senator, let me start. I recall vividly Republicans very reluctant to have this conversation in 2006 and 2008 about the quote-unquote the feel in the air approaching Election Day. It was apparent, and we were all reporting, that Democrats had the momentum. This year, there's a very different feel in the air. So let me ask you, if you were behind closed doors and I was one of your top donors to your campaign, and privately we were having a conversation, what would you be telling me about what you expect this November?
I would say the voters are understandably angry. They've been betrayed by their government the last decade. We had a budget surplus a decade ago that was squandered by 2 wars that were not paid for, charged to our grandchildren by a drug and insurance company bailout that in the name of Medicare privatization that was charged to our grandchildren, by tax cuts for the wealthy that were charged to our grandchildren, and deregulation of Wall Street, and trade agreements that send jobs overseas. I mean, from the first 7-8 years of this decade put us in this situation. So if I'm advising Democratic candidates, I would say, of course, you acknowledge the very deserved anger the voters have, but rather than letting this election be a referendum on the party in power, because we didn't get us into this situation, the Democrats and Barack Obama, I would encourage our candidates to make the contrast. Do you want to give the John Kasich, Rob Portman, Mike DeWines of the world another chance to come into power after they squandered what they had and put us in this situation? Or do you want to continue on a path we're going? It's not been nearly what we wanted. I mean, we were losing 700,000 jobs a month when Barack Obama took office nationally. More than that, we're now gaining jobs, not fast enough. We've got to do a lot more. But it's clear this election's about contrast, not a referendum on whoever happens to hold power the last year and a half and trying to change the direction of the country.
Let's put a couple doses of reality up and just look at the environment as it is right now. This is a Gallup poll. Generic congressional candidates, Republicans now have a 10-point lead over Democrats. You see it there, 51-41%. Gallup says this is the largest Republican polling edge at this stage in the 68 years of the generic ballot poll. And let's take a look at this quote from leading liberal economist Paul Krugman. He wrote earlier this week, quote, "This isn't a recovery in any sense that matters, and policymakers should be doing everything they can to change that fact." Paul's upset. Progressives angry about Afghanistan, a large block of young people and African Americans still facing unemployment and a job problem.
More than that. Yeah.
There's a sense that Republicans in 2010 are energized to vote and that Democrats may be staying home. If you add those two things together, this could be a 1994 all over again. How do you prevent that in the next 60 days or make the case that, wait a minute, we don't want 1994 all over again?
You make the case that it's a hard case to make because the Recovery Act, 750,000 jobs a month, as I said, more than 700 a month losing. We passed the Recovery Act. Things began to turn, but not quickly enough. But you have to make the contrast. Do you want to trust John Kasich and Rob Portman and Mike DeWine, people who wrote the Bush economic policy, people who were passed these trade agreements, people who were part of the deregulation of Wall Street, people who blew a hole in the budget surplus, in the budget, taking a surplus into a huge deficit? Do you want to trust them to lead again? And I know, there are some good signs. Krugman's right. We're not seeing the kind of economic growth we should. We've also, though...
Does that make you nervous when he writes something like that?
Of course it does. I mean, it doesn't matter if I'm nervous about that. What bothers me is we haven't had the economic... one of the things that I've done through the month of August, as I always do, I go around Ohio and I see a lot of pain. I see restaurant workers and people being trained by Community Action in Xenia to become, who are homeless with substance abuse problems, being trained to work in restaurants. I see unemployed people in Lucasville that are now trying to do solar installation. I'm seeing some good signs, but the pain is so much out there, and we've got to do more than we're doing. But Republicans have basically said, no, they want to continue the policies of tax cuts for the rich, not paying for the war in Iraq, more deregulation, and that's what got us there. So I think the voters have to make, as always, make a choice. Do you want to see us go back to the people that got us in this situation, or do you want to see us try to move forward? And it's been fits and starts. The Dispatch on Thursday had an article about how manufacturing is increasing for 13 months in a row. That's not much solace to somebody who lost their job or can't find a job, but it's beginning to get better. Do we want to go back to what these people that got us into this situation caused?
The Democrats, from the president on the national level down to here in Ohio, have been making that very case that, you know, we don't want to go back to the policies of the past or the policies that got us in the ditch. But as Jim pointed out, the Gallup poll still shows a differential. Other polls here in Ohio show Republicans with a lead. What's happening, do you think? Is that message not getting through, or voters just not buying it?
Well, I think the voters are, as I was trying to say, the voters are understandably angry. It's always easiest to blame the party in power. But it's a question of going deeper than that. And the Republicans are, and I don't want to sound partisan about this, Republicans are so good at distracting, attracting, diverting attention elsewhere. I mean, this whole issue on the mosque, which affects, frankly, almost nobody in Ohio. What's important is, are we growing manufacturing, or small businesses getting credit so that they can expand? 2 out of 3 new jobs in this country is created by small business, yet the Republicans have blocked our bill. Senator Voinovich was the only Republican supporting it during the summer. We hope to pass it in September. I think we will. That should help us. But let me make this, without going overboard on statistics. The 8 years of Bill Clinton, 22 million net job increase in this country, 22 million. The 8 years of George Bush, 1 million, not even enough to take care of college graduates and others coming out of high school or the Army. 22 million versus 1 million, yet the voters are going to the polls. Are they going to think, let's let the people that created 1 million jobs in 8 years versus 22 million, let's bring their philosophy back and try that? And it's clear it was the Bush economic philosophy. You don't want to talk about the past, but you learn from the past. Do we want to bring back Bush economic policy, tax cuts for the rich, more trade agreements, more deregulation of Wall Street? Do we want to bring that back and go through this again, potentially? And I think if you scratch a little deeper, the Gallup poll measures what it measures. But if you scratch deeper and you start thinking about this, it's pretty clear you don't turn the government back over to the people that almost drove us off the cliff. And if we hadn't done the auto investment, if we hadn't done what nobody wanted to do with Wall Street, to save the financial industry, we would be in worse shape. It's hard to make the case. It'd be worse if we hadn't come to power, but that's the case that we're going to work to have voters listen to.
Voters are saying they want change. What you're saying is they don't want the change that's being offered to them if they really look at it closely, but you only have 9 weeks.
I understand that.
How do you get that out?
Well, it's hard, and I'm counting on the Dispatch and public radio to do that, to help us with that. I mean, it is hard, and nobody said this is easy, and I'm not whining. It's my job to help do that. But I think in the end, when you look at particularly this state, you look at the manufacturing job loss, and you think of the 3 candidates, the 3 major statewide Republican candidates, and they all voted for every trade agreement, every kind of job outsourcing tax break. And look what it's gotten us. I mean, I grew up in Mansfield, and I look what's happened to my town. I can look at Newark or Springfield or bigger cities, Columbus and Akron and Dayton, and see what's happened with manufacturing job loss. It's not all the last 8 years, but the last 8 years accelerated it because of these trade agreements, because of these outsourcing tax breaks that almost every Republican supported. A few Democrats did, and I'm embarrassed that some in my party did. But it's clear that the difference between Fisher and Portman, or Kasich and Strickland, are stark on which direction they take the country.
Senator, very quickly, we just have a minute left in this segment. I do want to put up poll numbers. You mentioned Fisher-Portman. This poll from Public Policy Polling late this week, it shows that Lieutenant Governor Fisher, who's been on the statewide ballot, as we all know, many times in the last couple decades, at just 38% in this public policy poll. Rob Portman approaching that 50% mark at 45%. National Democrats, there's a sense, Jonathan Riskin, our colleague from the Dispatch in Washington, said last week, there is a sense that National Democrats, the National Democratic Party, could begin to write this off, or be thinking about writing this race off, because a Republican currently holds it. What's your view of the Fisher campaign thus far, and can he turn those numbers around?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the money that, and first, condolences to former Congressman Portman.
Absolutely.
His father died this week, and I went through that with my mother a year and a half ago, and I know that's all that matters to him now, and I just want to extend my condolences, as I will personally, with him. Rob Portman has spent millions of dollars on television, and Lee Fisher hasn't yet, and 7-point lead is is real shrinkable, if I could coin a word that clearly
We'll
isn't.
go with it.
It's clearly something that can be overcome. The National Democrats are not writing this race off. I talk to them often about this, and Lee's had problems in his campaign. Everybody does in early stages. I think when his money starts to equalize a little more, this is a down to the wire race, as the governor's race is.
Okay, we'll pick. You know, this election cycle, it reminds me a lot of 1982. We were all much younger, much younger then. But Ronald Reagan had been elected in an angry change election. The economy was bad that he inherited from Carter. His approval ratings were at about 35% in that midterm election, and Republicans took a beating. Of course, 2 years later, he came back and he won 49 states. But in that first midterm, his approval numbers, again, 35%, pretty low. If we look at this chart from Gallup, this really kind of, I think, says it all about 2010, much better than anything that I could say or ask you about. This is the president's approval tracking numbers from the beginning of his presidency until now. I mean, it leads to the question of, are there any economic changes realistically in the next 9 weeks or less that Ohioans will feel, that will be real, that can begin to turn this sense of blame Washington, blame the president, and blame Democrats?
I don't know, and it's. I mean, there are clearly good signs in the economy, but they don't. People aren't feeling them because they're not getting. There's not enough people being hired back. I mean,
does it realistically? Does it feel like 82 to you too?
Well,
is that a good comparison?
Maybe. I don't know. Ohio. I mean, what does strike me about 82 versus now? In 1982, we came out of the Reagan recession. Ohio went right back to business as usual. We were, aluminum, chemicals, cement, glass, paper, steel, auto state. We went right back to it. We did okay until the next downturn. Then we suffer more than the rest of the country. I think the difference is this recession, worse than 82, and maybe not measurably worse, but worse in so many different ways because of housing mostly. This recession, in part because of Governor Strickland, in part because of others, we are much better prepared for the future. We are establishing ourselves as the Silicon Valley of clean energy. We're going to see in this state we're more and more of an aerospace state. We're more and more of a biomedical state. I think we're looking for on high-speed rail to do a lot more manufacturing here. I mean, there are things happening in this state. We are much better prepared once the national economy starts to rise. We're much better prepared to do better in this state, to keep our young people here, to give opportunities in industries that really didn't exist or that we didn't really thrive on or didn't really lead on that we're going to now. So I mean, strip away the politics for a minute. I know what your question was, but strip that away, and we're much better prepared coming out of this recession than we were 30 years ago. And that's the absolute good news that makes me much more medium and long-term optimistic for our state and for our country.
But do you think the fact that this one is hanging on so much longer than previous recessions, do you think that is playing into people's minds where they're thinking that we're not having a recovery?
Well, sure. I mean, this has been the most painful economic time since the Depression. I don't think there's much doubt about that. And the politics is going to be what it's going to be. The blame is going to be directed where it's directed. But I do think that Governor Strickland and a lot of us working together have prepared us better for the future. It doesn't ease the pain now. It doesn't mean somebody's house won't be foreclosed on. We've had 14 years in a row of increased foreclosures in the state. Not because of speculators like Florida and Texas and California, but because of bad economic times. So we have a lot to do, and we've got to focus on jobs. And my goal in the next 2 months is, what do you do for job growth? The politics, of course, I care that my party does well and that we don't bring back in this group of people that drove us almost over the cliff. But
here. When one thinks back to 1994, Bill Clinton was sort of in the same predicament. Republicans came flooding back. Newt Gingrich became Speaker. Historically, as you look back now, one could make the argument that Newt Gingrich was the best thing that happened to Bill Clinton and the Democrats as you look at 1996 and what happened. Is there a potential here, if Republicans take control of the House and perhaps the Senate, that maybe that will create a better political environment for the next 2 years for Democrats than having the ability to point to a body and say, look at what John Boehner or the Republicans are doing, impeding our progress here?
Well, John Boehner is no Newt Gingrich, and I'm not sure what I even mean by that. But
what do you mean?
I don't know what I mean by that. It just sounded good. When Republicans are in power, they're never popular because it's the same. In the last 15 years, it's the same thing. they quickly line up more tax cuts for the rich, more deregulation for the financial services, for banks, more trade agreements that cost us jobs. That's what they're going to do if they win. So, of course, the public will understand it better if they're in power, and it will help Barack Obama in 2012. I don't have any doubt about that, but that doesn't matter. What matters is we've got to get this economy on track, and we've got to do the right things. And I think we're starting to. We're not there yet. I don't want to go back.
Very good. Senator, as always, good to see you. Thank you so much.